Hi. That's what my actual voice sounds like. Hey everybody, how's it going? It's such a joy to be here. Sorry, I was looking over at my phone because I was setting the timer from the reading itself. I lose track. But yeah, hi everybody. I'm Julian. I wrote this. And I guess the best thing that I can do is begin at the beginning. Oxford. Well, amen. Well, goddamn. Mississippi is all arrivals. Mississippi is all beginnings. The first time I arrive in Oxford, Mississippi, it's mid-July and swelter jewels the kudzu with frenzied summer rains. This is the zero country, I think, as the kudzu swirls over itself like waves of water. This is the zero country, this place that is home to some and strange to me. This is the zero country, Mississippi, and I am about to take my first step into my new life by chasing down one that ended decades before I was born. I am looking for a particular plantation, but it barely registers at the start that Oxford is riddled with plantation-style houses, American palaces with window stacked upon window, every column bone bright in the dark. There are plantations everywhere, and they are never the plantation I need. It turns out, even with a northern upbringing, there is no escaping the knowledge of what a plantation house looks like. All around, there's the dregs of one empire mimicking another. Most plantation-style homes have an almost naive amount of windows. It's a hostile symmetry, almost violently perfect. Hanif and I are two black boys making our way through the dim between the streetlights, pushing towards the town square, the courthouse looming up in the distance. Hanif asks me if I know how Oxford came to have so many plantation houses. They line sorority row, fraternity row, North Lamar Street, smooth white columns everywhere gleaming. A poster celebrating Taylor Swift's new album hangs between the sorority houses. Taylor is hung up on a cross like a white feminist Jesus. I tell Hanif I don't know the answer because I don't. But in my heart, I feel a little nugget of shame that I've lived 3 years in Oxford and I haven't spent much time thinking about where these Greek revival houses came from. I've been trying to figure out where I came from. I've been busy trying to figure out where I am. I'm surrounded by stories. The story of my great-grandfather whose records I came to find, story of myself, story of my family, stories that shaped us and the stories we return to out of scarcity, cousins we make out of characters. My story doesn't start with how Oxford got all its plantation houses, but it's as good a place as any. That story turns out to be old as mirrors. Oxford, just another empire mimicking another. We'll probably come back to that, but I want to read some other fun stuff from rap, just kind of around the collection. The idea behind this book was that originally it was just supposed to be a bunch of cute TV takes. Nothing personal was supposed to happen. Certainly wasn't supposed to be a treatise on what it takes to stay alive. But it has become that along the way, and I'm very grateful for it. Yeah. So this is an essay from this is an excerpt from an essay about T-Pain, because he is on my mind these days. It turns out my favorite T-Pain song is "A Change Is Gonna Come." He's escorted in, as always, by something familiar, but not what it once was. The opening notes of the iconic Sam Cooke song, A Change Is Gonna Come, are higher, opening the door for sweeping strings. It's not what we're used to with T-Pain on the mic. It almost sounds like the keys themselves are anxious. And I imagine, maybe, T-Pain was nervous then too. It had been a decade since his first album, a year since he sat and sang various hits on the most popular episode of NPR's Tiny Desk ever. A cappella. My nigga, accompanied only by expectation. I don't know if he was nervous, but I know he must have been nervous. T-Pain has shared in the past that he's never worked with a vocal coach, that he knows he has sung from the wrong place for years to the point he loses his voice multiple times a year. But to change that risks losing what made him a legend. He learned to love that hurt, but what if tonight is the night it buckles all together? It's what happens when you trust your own voice. It can fail you. It can fail you in front of everybody. But this is triumph music. earned melody. T-Pain clad in a button-down shirt and a tie with a buckle winking like a shared joke beneath his chin is good from the very first note. And watching from my own small room, now deep in my 20s, I begin to cry. Like I said, I am always sorry for something, and most of getting older has been figuring out why. On this day, I'm crying because I doubted him, and still he made room for me inside one of my favorite songs. Tenderness has been as much about making space for failure as anything. Beyond the room in which I write this, it's one of the hottest summers ever written. Most of what I've grieved all my life is still alive, and where it isn't, I'm trying to be gentle with what notes they left behind. On screen, T-Pain singing of a change until he sang in another country altogether. I hope wherever you are, you find a moment like this someday. I promise. Everything is tender. Nothing is bleeding.
That is so gorgeous. I just have to interject that your writing is just so beautiful, and there's so much to every sentence. I just want to go back and read every sentence 3 times.
Thank you so much. You're so kind. Also, sorry, one brief moment. I need to let my partner know the food I was. Nope, sounds like they found it. Fantastic. It was supposed to be here beforehand. You know how traffic is. All right, so here's an important thing to understand about this book. My family is from ostensibly as far back as the Black side of my family can be traced. It is from a little town in Mississippi called Water Valley. Uh, and I went there because it's 53 miles away from Oxford, Mississippi, which is where I moved to after this harrowing depression nearly took my life from me. And I had to find a way to rebuild it. And so I went chasing down this story of an ancestral trauma, which will come up later in the reading. But in the meantime, let's do this. I call City Hall and get a message that they're out for lunch. So I make my way into a bar a little way down from the Railroad Museum and see a flag I would have thought was for Texas, if not for the magnolia tree flaring out against a stark white background. And look, I'm not one to weep for flags. I'm still not. But I've wept over a life denied before. Whenever I have imagined my grandmother's first steps in Greenville, some of her last ever in Mississippi, it is always beneath a mythically large magnolia tree, and every heady blossom blooms from grenade to belle to bride, and it is the second slowest surrender in all of Mississippi. And the only Mississippi flag I'd ever known had a Confederate flag tucked in the eye of it, and it had flown since 1894 to stop some Confederate veterans from doing what Confederate soldiers are for. Flown since the first time my grandmother would have been able to point a child's finger to all 13 stars and learn that they all hated her equally. I wanted a life for her beneath that magnolia tree. I wanted every generous star within reach. The man seated beneath the flag knows I'm not from around here. He asks what I'm doing in Mississippi, and I tell him I came looking for a man swallowed in the drawl of June. When I asked the man next to me what the flag was of, he blinked and said, Mississippi, and did not elaborate. And maybe that's because the flag was something of a limited edition. According to Mississippi Governor John M. Stone in 1894, the Magnolia flag only ran from 1861 to 1865, a period in which famously nothing of any import at all happened in the state of Mississippi. Stone, hilariously, only mentioned that the flag was commissioned at a state convention in 1861, secession, aka grand opening, and then decommissioned at a separate state convention in 1865, surrender to the Union Army, aka grand closing. But it is years before I learned this, years before the final state flag to hold the Confederate battle symbol comes down for the last time because George Floyd was murdered, and we trade Black Death for symbols all the time in America. The magnolia blooms still on flags across the state, some with trees, some without. And still, when I imagine my grandmother fleeing the only home she'd ever known, just for a moment, all the magnolia petals perfume the wind churn until, like her father, they are almost feathers, almost birds. I can't know if there was ever a tree. Only that grief makes me wonder a number of things I can now never ask. Among them, if me and my grandmother shared a favorite flower, their petals' aroma thickening the late Mississippi sky until you can barely smell the ash. All right. Cool. We're doing great on time. All right. Awesome. Um, yeah, let's do this. Let's do this one next. This is my first, this year has been the first time that I've ever gotten a chance to live with someone who I was dating, someone who I'm romantically involved with. And they are the first person who I've ever placed a love poem in the book for. So this is that. There's a joke where God walks into a bar and it becomes my favorite love story about time. The way the alliance between my anxiety and my memory is set up, I really struggle with what it means to be present. Often, I am in another time even as I am speaking to you, even now. Everything I've loved and everything I've survived is already there, simultaneous and loud. To me, there is no progression. The idea of past is something I understand, but not a thing I feel. Watching the penultimate episode of HBO's Watchmen, a god walks into a bar. A joke that I'm kind of a bootleg Dr. Manhattan in this way comes out of my mouth. If you retcon his ability to teleport, create life from nothing, and live on Mars and replace it with mostly debilitating anxiety, we're exactly the same. Like Dr. Manhattan, I don't describe the concept of before in the way most people describe it to me. There is only layer upon layer of now. And yet, it is May 2022, and lately the world is still terrible. But it's my partner's birthday week, and they've never been to Mississippi before. So we rent a car, and I watch the magnolias like pearls in the kudzu as we whip towards Biloxi. I'm pointing to the shoreline, smelling this state where I've been a fugitive from much, including myself. But this feels different, a trip we're taking for the sake of how much I've fallen in love with the lavender scent of my partner's hair, her eyes the color of an autumn moon. There is a part of me now that is always here at this moment where I relearned Mississippi is a wonderful place to be in love. What it was to hold them for the first time, feel their voice against me as they ask, "When are you?" Because my eyes are far away, staring into the fog clinging to yellowed streetlights beyond our tiny balcony. But this time, it is all visions of the future, our future. How lucky to be at their side and see their many transformations. All the years we might have where the first thing I hear is how they say my name the way a morning glory opens its petals. My partner worries differently about the future than I do. It's one of the many ways their brain makes me feel more possible. They don't believe in knowing exactly what will happen. They believe in trying anyway. Even when my mind is everywhere that could tear us apart, she finds a little Eden in the unknown. I'm many years into the future when they tug my sleeve and ask again, "When are you?" The rain makes halos for every streetlight for miles, and I pull myself back to the time I'm present in because I choose them. I know that part of me will always be with this moment where the question matters so much more than the answer, because the answer is almost always everywhere. Dr. Manhattan was doomed from the moment they met, of course. He knows he will die, and he knows that the moment he fell in love with Angela Abar is the moment that he told her that she could not save him from the men who have finally come to succeed at dismantling a god. That he loves her not because Regina King going straight Tom Clancy novel on at least 11 white supremacists is awe-inspiring and heartbreaking in equal measure. He loves her for the attempt, that at the end of everything, she's going to try anyway. I'm writing this to you at a time of bad weather and worse news. Every day, the world ends a little more, and like any American, I want to shelter in the past. Like any bootleg god, I want to build new worlds in my head and name them the future just to know what will happen. Or at least I used to. But I don't want that anymore. I want to hold my partner to my chest for as many days as I have a chest. I have no idea what will happen. I simply know that, like all relationships, They are there in the beginning of a stretch of time, and they are there at the end of it. I don't know what that end will be, but my love, in the end, each time you have kissed me, it has been the end of running. I am yours to make shelter of. For you, I forsake, however briefly, all other worlds. All right, I got a longer one that I want to tee up, and then close on something happy. Yeah, we'll close on something happy. Um, this is from a essay at the back of the book. It's called Tell the Homies I'm in Autumn. I'm in the autumn and they ain't got hoods. And the most important thing that you need to know about this essay, heading into it, is that it started as a craft essay about how Tupac and John Keats are the same person. So here we go. Number 5. And look, it's always worth mentioning the suburbs have no addresses in the dark, and that shit is by design. Everything in the town of Swarthmore is built with the idea that you've been there your whole life, that this is a comfortable darkness between the streetlights. The bulbs flicker into an autumn of a kind, and it can be beautiful if you fuck with not knowing where you are. If the dark doesn't demand an answer of what a kid like you is doing in one of the richest suburbs in all of Pennsylvania, it's gorgeous. And you know, it's not a question your student ID can answer. If you know that no answer will be sufficient. In that flickering light, yellowed and thin as an accusation, I was making my way to the only target for miles in the summer of 2014. I was listening to Tupac through some dingy Sears headphones that only fully worked on one side. I wish I had better motivation, but to keep it real, I was hungry, and everything else was closed. The almost rain clung to the air like a veil, and even knowing where this memory ends, I still want it to be beautiful. That moment before the memory becomes significant, before the moment snaps shut clean as a trap. The thing about the Target outside Swarthmore is that it is surrounded by the Springfield Mall. In 2014, it was proudly home to a Ruby Tuesdays, a Sephora, the Sears from which I had gotten these mostly broken headphones on clearance and pretty much nothing else. Oh, there was also a GameStop. My bad. Anyway, the Springfield Mall was always easy to spot because as you walked the crooked smile of broken pavement, the parking lot lights shined a blue halo into the clingy mist above. And your boy had that pain, that violin playing in my hip, playing that same note it had been for 4 or 5 years since it tore. And on this particular night, Tupac's voice faded in and out of those cheap ass headphones. And there's a way, even in the early August of it all, that the chorus of Thug's Mansion harmonized with the leaves that had already fallen. And I was tired and hungry, and a nigga had never been so happy to see a Target, or so devastated to see that while Target was absolutely supposed to be open, the mall had closed, which meant I'd come all that way for nothing. So I sat a spell on the bench of the bus stop, hoping the driver was black since they were generally down to let me ride back for free if the bus was empty. And then this older white woman sits down at the other end of the bench. The next song flickered in the right ear of my busted headphones, and so I half hear the opening piano of Runnin' before I realize that she's talking to me. And just as the Edward Snowhook winds in with I wonder if they'll laugh when I pause the track. And at first, things are as fine as they can be. I am good at smiling when I don't mean to, and this musty-mouthed woman is chattering about Target being closed too early, and like any other night in America, shit is cool until it's not. Excuse me, young man, are you black? Cuts through my quiet headphones. Before I can answer, or point to the bright blue dashiki I was wearing as an answer, bus stop lady has already continued with, now there's no need to get offended. I move to say that I am not offended, even though I am. But because I'm a boy doing an impression of a man, doing an impression of a man, doing an impression of a man trying desperately not to get killed. But again, bus stop lady was still going, milky eyes glazed and staring over my head as if she was talking to a ghost, all her threats slurred through the gaps in her casual smile, one long yellowing sentence unspooled into the fading summer. I'm just asking if you're black because there was a black lady here earlier. She got offended, and I told her, now you look here. You don't talk to me that way. I am white. Do you hear me? And you are black, and you just don't talk to me that way, or I'll call the police. This is America. And black people, they don't live here. They just die here. And I'm sure, so sure that the night was warm because I remember the cling of the dashiki's cotton to my chest. But in the phone call I faked, the sprint I did not hide away from one woman who wanted me dead into the suburbia that agreed. It tasted like the first notes of autumn were already on the August wind. And as I sprinted, the pain in my hip yanked into melody, and I could still hear Tupac's running, crackling in the bad speakers saying, they'll laugh when I am dead. Before the quiet returned, I was the only sound for what felt like a whole season. Autumn in the static, autumn in the failing streetlights, autumn in the suffocated leaves, autumn in the swelling of my knees. My people, our perpetual autumn, what insufficient heavens we have been offered. A day later, I posted a Facebook status on what I experienced. A few days after that, Mike Brown was murdered. All of autumn dims, and my father and I have our first and last conversation on whether I have been feeling suicidal. I say no. I say I am fine. I say I am not going anywhere. Even with him, I am sometimes good at smiling when I do not mean to. I am at the window of the library later that semester, the elegiac hum of a Tupac song tucked under my tongue while I sit through a November meeting about a group project I don't give a shit about. Partially because the grand jury verdict comes down tonight. I am the only black kid in the group. Certain seasons are never late. The grand jury agrees that there is no victim and there is no crime, and my classmates are sad but resume their meeting. It is autumn. I am remembering that my favorite song is about a heaven I'm afraid to qualify for. I close my eyes. Blood pounds in my ears. All the leaves abandon their branches. I never get to do that one. Okay, cool. Let's close out with an essay about Donald Glover's TV show Atlanta. I also rap in this essay. Oh, when did my camera cut off? When did that happen? I did not touch that.
You're
My
back.
bad.
You're back.
I did not touch that. Oh man, I did all this choreography when that. Okay. Anyway, I don't know when that happened. I do not know how that happened. But yes, okay. I also rapped in this essay because I used to be a very bad rapper. 8. I got some grief that led me to the wrong conclusion. Woods go on forever. Lord, forgive me all of my delusion. When I first got to Mississippi, I didn't really rock with nature. I'm a city kid to the core. My bad. Also, there's no love lost between me and bugs. Nobody has ever gotten me to use the words hike and fun in the same sentence, and I am not old, but I am too old to think that that will ever change. All this to say, I have never expected to fall in love with Mississippi's woods at the end of the hardest year of my life, but I did. After graduation, after I moved out of my room in my Philly apartment, after Dr. Derek Harrell looked at my Hail Mary application to the Master of Fine Arts program at the University of Mississippi and bet on me to be better than the story my grades told about me, I pulled up to Mississippi in 90-degree heat, feeling, finally, like I had a chance. Against all odds, I'd been put on. The woods that surrounded where I lived in Oxford are flanked by pines and kudzu. That first year in Mississippi, I lived alone. Most nights, I sat on my camping chair on my little balcony, staring off into those woods and telling myself stories about the wildest things I could imagine living in that forest. And then, Mississippi would send something stranger. Uh, Stray dogs rumored to be the children of dogs displaced by Katrina sometimes file out from the woods to kick it near the dumpster I lived across from. I think about this and the yawn of the branches of a dogwood tree, how the petals ride the breeze until every street around us wears a pink sequined gown. 2015 had taught me to crave quiet. Oxford taught me how to fall in love with a different kind of noise. Of course, not every sound in the woods is an invitation. We're still in America, after all. The episode Woods follows Paperboy on the anniversary of his mother's death. He's the victim of an attempted robbery, which forces him to sprint into the woods. Just like that, another fugitive from his own grief. A black boy living in terror inside the body of a black man all alone in the woods. And isn't that one of the most American lonelinesses you've ever heard? The woods in the South are not the woods in Walnut Park or Swarthmore or even like the trees I ran between in Atlanta so many years before as a child. 7 people were lynched in Oxford, Mississippi, and nobody has ever told me which tree. Paperboy runs into a man who may actually be a hallucination. All that's clear is the glare off the box cutter the man holds to Paperboy's throat. How clear he says, "Keep standing still. You're gone, boy. The only people who have time are dead." I see all our shared lonely from here, how you can spend a lifetime with your grief keeping you company and emerge as alone as before. The only way out is through. Still, the morning of Halloween 2020, hours before I will make a second trip through the woods just outside of Water Valley, Mississippi, the town where my family was once enslaved. I'm in a different woods. It is early morning, and the bleary smudge of the sun slices the basketball court in half. Tucked in the backwoods off Jackson Ave, I'm shirtless with the thickest beard and longest hair I've ever had. Truly, COVID had me looking like Corbin Blue's ain't shit cousin. I will always be a black boy who comes from need. From a long line of black men who dreamed of ending our hunger by hiding in school until we could invent somewhere it was safe to be ourselves. I still think everybody has a year they never really leave. I also think Mississippi taught me the way back to the present, to this moment with a ball in my hand and some free time before I try to find my dead. I shoot my shot, watch its perfect arc. I remember the first time I fell in love with Mississippi, it was the fact that there's so much sky here. There's no romance to the story of my escape from Pennsylvania to Mississippi, my reverse migration, as some have called it, while they ask me what I'm doing in Mississippi, and I tell an old story about a place where the light flinches with memory. But it feels like love to be back and alone, that for once my loneliness is not more important to me than my solitude. It feels like love to be listening to the woods yawning, imagining, singing under the gold barrel of the sun. It feels like love to think of everyone and everything that carried me out of that year. It feels like love. It feels like the whole forest humming. We on, we on, we on. Yeah,
Wow,
that was fun.
so beautiful. Let me see how I can view this now. Speaker. I'll just do it this way. Um, as I confessed to you, well, we were kind of warming up for this. I'm only partway into the book, and I feel so torn because I want to keep rereading um, parts, and at the same time, I'm so compelled and propelled to keep going forward. I feel like you invite everybody into your story, regardless of what our position is or where we're coming from. I mean, you and I have very different histories and identities, and I'm immediately just filled with this great desire to accompany you. So that's a huge triumph of writing, I think, because again, how do you go from the personal and the individual, and really something is very universal there. And also the fact that you're a poet is so evident because there's every sentence is charged, and these images are incredible and so much depth. So I want to tell everybody, please read this book. It's extraordinary. I'm just swept away by it. So happy to get acquainted with it. Right early on, I was struck by a sentence that I want to repeat to you and ask if you can talk about this in terms of the arc of the book, or even some of the artistic and strategic decisions you made with the book, because in some ways I feel like this sort of tension plays out in so many different ways, but I'll read the sentence. obscurity is both an inheritance and a superpower, it turns out. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thank you for all those kind words. Yeah, okay. How do I want to approach this? So contextually, that line comes from one of the very first essays in the book that ever like got finished. And this is actually like I think that it might be one of the ones that's closest to like the way that it was conceived and the way that it is in the book are like almost like a perfect circle Venn diagram wise. And so that essay is called hashtag Julian for Spider-Man. And it's kind of like a general survey, I guess. I have like little different pockets of my life and playing upon how in the 2018 version of Miles Morales' story Into the Spider-Verse, not to be confused with the even somehow even better sequel Across the Spider-Verse, which came out last year. Um, each time that one of the Spider-Men shows up, they say, okay, people, let's do this one last time. Because the thing is that we have this like constant series of Spider-Man origin stories. They're playing on it's playing on the fact that like people are tired of if you're my age, you've seen literally every Spider-Man movie that's ever been made. Like every single Spider-Man movie that's been made has happened in your lifetime. And there's been like 8 of them, and I'm like 31. So do the math, you know? So within that, Miles has this ability to turn invisible, but he doesn't necessarily have an ability to control when he is invisible. And I was like, well, this is actually maybe one of the blackest things Marvel has ever done in terms of just like giving a black character not only powers that like I say this with love to like all of my superhero communities, but black people are generally just given, they give us electricity powers so that we can be powerful in like amazing ways, but also must inherently hold ourselves back. Like Storm can't just like let loose on anybody and anything, right? So giving Miles this very deeply like black adolescent power of like learning that like you can turn invisible and it can keep you safe from all kinds of things. Like it's like a camouflage, like instinctual thing. But that also it means that like sometimes when you like desperately need to be seen, you desperately need to be done, like these are the moments when you can actually disappear the most. And I felt so aligned with that like experience. I felt so aligned with that experientially, and you see that throughout the essay. But in terms of like how obscurity as like both inheritance and superpower like shows up within the collection, I am here like trying to find a history that like was disappeared from us, like it was taken from us, like this whole other interestingly, like you talk about like across the Spider-Verses, like there's also this parallel of like like what is the thesis question of like the black quality of my family, right? Like there is the ongoing question of like the overall question of like what is our lineage if there's never any of the slavery that brought our bloodline originally to this place, right? But then there's the much more contemporary question, which I only inherited very like relatively recently in my life. Like for much of my life, I knew that my grandmother was from St. Louis, and before that she lived in East St. Louis. But the fact that she was from Mississippi was a thing that I didn't find out until I was almost already dead. I was in my early 20s when that like came up as like a definitive fact because she was experiencing also a bit of dementia, like long before I was even born. So you go off to try and find this obscure history, and it is both this superpower of knowing like, oh my gosh, look at this incredible lineage of like superheroes that I came from, people who saved themselves not only from themselves, but saved themselves from an entire country. And also concurrent to that point, there is no or if there is a book about how to do this, I have not found it in terms of like how do you do archival research when the nation's archive is against you. That like where would I like I used to make this joke all the time that people would say, how's the research coming? And I was like, it's not going great because I don't know where to look. They're just like, what do you mean you don't know where to look? I'm like, well, where am I going to look up? Like, oh, yes, they ran my great grandfather out of town for pretending to be a white man. Like, when am I going to find, when and where am I going to find space to do that? In the racism book? Like, where would somebody have written this down? So how do you even begin to structure the research capacity of that is like one of those like ongoing questions that throughout the book as I'm trying to put that together in real time. So I was really hoping that, you know, the obscurity would be something that was relatable to anybody who's ever had to do archival ancestral research, especially when trying to navigate like kind of like what is to me, not even to me, like what is objectively generational trauma, right? So how do you begin to try and do that work? This is my memoir, I guess, of like one attempt, one model of what it means
Yeah,
to
I love how personal it is, because we think of that now often as a concept, and we even use the phrase generational trauma. But what you do here is you just dive into the interrogation of that through this very personal journey, and the fact that things were fracturing the way you were talking about, how you couldn't even see, you were almost compelled or driven to go outside yourself into this environment that's your history, that's cellular. And so I feel like this book takes us into an experience of that that is so immediate, so physical. You know, I love the way you talk about place in the book as well, how Mississippi can be this place where historically, now we're looking at monuments and everything now that's in the discourse, and you talk about these Confederate monuments, but it's like uncovering your own monuments and what is a monument, and time being this kind of numinal space. So I love the complexity that you're touching on all the time in the book, and that's why it's such a rich experience. But I I wanted to ask you also, just in terms of craft and the fact that you're an award-winning poet. And as I say, the book reads like a long poem to me anyway, but um, your choice for your, how you were going to write this, your choice of was going to be essays, or how did you know what the shape of this project would be?
Oh, it took 10 million years. It took a while to. I think that there's a larger gap than I wish that there was between identifying what the book was and accepting what the book was. I think that like, I made the joke at the top, but it also was not a joke. Originally this was supposed to be a book of cute TV takes. Like that Atlanta essay originally was 750 words, and it was it was like what was it? Dustin Parsons described it as a bouillon cube of an essay, that it's just like it was just waiting to like get into that hot water. And I think that's actually really a metaphor for like what that process was like book
Oh,
wise,
I
right?
love that. That's great.
Everything like poetry wise, like, I was like, first of all, like you're trained towards like concision and compression, and like that's like what allows that lyric to like really sing through, you know? And then like you get into this prose space and it's like, oh, okay, like that was a really good sentence. Next sentence gotta next sentence is also gotta be really hot. And so they would kind of like end up being these like really lyrically beautiful, but also really, really dense and like fun to write, not the most fun to read at times, because sometimes it would just be like, okay, like enough with the spoon is the moon and the moon is the spoon. All right, let's move forward. What else is going on here? And so trying to find that harmony, find that balance, right, between like, like lyric and irony and persona is like these three driving engines of a poem. Like, how does that correlate into nonfiction where I'm still so much playing like, uh that distance between like speaker and poet, right, is like a thing that we respect in poetry. It's sacred to us, and nonfiction, like all of that infrastructure is necessarily removed in terms of like what the audience is expecting from you. And so I think that I was carrying a lot of my own anxiety about just like, okay, well, let me just make sure that I'm doing everything that I do well, really well, and then we can try and figure out the rest of it on the back end. So yeah, so originally they were all just really, really lyrically dense. They ended up reading a lot like long poems that did not want to be long poems. And so ultimately I was like, okay, what is all of this? Because sometimes lyric is music, but also sometimes lyric is swelling. It's swelling that is like taking place around an actual injury and is trying to cushion it for me. So what is all of this obscuring? And once it became like, okay, this is not a book about proving to everyone how much TV I've watched and how smart I am about it. It is also not a book about teaching everyone that like had I been given the opportunity, I could have been that great rapper that I wanted to be. It is a book about like I went off in pursuit of this lineage. I went off in pursuit of what this means and how can I take something that I know you can see, something I know you can feel, or that I know that you can reference and try to like leave the door open on this memory through that, right? So I didn't read anything from it today, but one of my favorite essays in the book, one of the ones that I'm most proud of, is about this show called BoJack Horseman, which is basically like, what if Bob Saget was a depressed horse? And just you'd think oh yeah, it's animated. That's also important,
I
right?
read that one.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of BoJack. But the reason that BoJack essay, the original concept and conceit of that BoJack essay was I was supposed to be just like a conversation about like BoJack and therapy. Like it was just like the original title was Everything's a Metaphor for Depression, and it just wasn't working. It wasn't working at all. And 100% of my personal opinion, 100% of the reason that that was happening is because I had the idea for the essay, and then the actual event that the essay needed to be about happened. Like 2 years after I had the idea that I wanted to write something about BoJack, my grandmother passed. And I was like, oh, okay, every story about grief is also a story about time. I can we didn't for this book, but like, if we were ever doing like a special edition, like I would put in some like old pictures of my grandmother. There aren't many, but like I would put in some old pictures so you could see she really was the prettiest girl in all East St. Louis for a good little grip. And she really did have this like this gorgeous bright red dress. And it's like one of the only pictures I ever saw of her young when I was a kid, right? I can show you those pictures. I can tell you stories. And hopefully you can put all of those things together into something that vaguely approximates the elegy that I'm trying to do. But this is adding in kind of like a third element, third heat, if you will, 30 Rock reference. But like a third element, right, of if you've never seen my grandmother, if you've never been a Black person who would be concerned and confused to see a bunch of Confederate war reenactors, this is a real thing that happened. This is really in the book. There's a bunch of Confederate war reenactors
That's
just
a crazy moment when that
it was
happens.
bonkers. A bunch of Confederate war reenactors in full uniform come to bury their dead homie, just wandering through the graveyard. If you
Cemetery,
have
yes.
like only like a little bit of a like, wow, that's super weird, as opposed to oh shit, ghosts reaction, how do I make that door? Right. And so for me, I was like the easiest shorthand that I ever had for people to try and explain that, like, there's so much gorgeous and important Black writing, especially in terms of like, Kiese Laymon's Heavy, for instance, is so much a monument, to touch on your phrasing from earlier, to the power of Catherine Coleman, to the power of his grandmother and the space that she made on that porch, these little undercommons that we have for ourselves, right? There's so much gorgeous writing about Black folks who have like loved their grandmothers, and there is less of a prominent archive of Black writers who have survived their grandmothers. And I wanted to try and find a way to create an essay that could say that it was both. She was an incredibly tough and wonderful survivor of things that no human being should ever have had to even conceive of. And she was also, a mean and abusive person
Like tough
who
on
was
your father
completely too
and
mean to die. She
yeah.
was both of those things, and that is really
Um
interesting.
I've I'm wondering what you think your next project might be, and did this book kind of take you to a place where there's some things you don't feel you need to write about in the same way anymore. And I'm just curious because there's so much that honestly that you're dealing with in this book. And also it was kind of, I'm assuming there was a kind of healing involved for you to go through it, and how that might inflect what you see as your next big project.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it was definitely a very it was a very healing process once I was certain that it was done. When I was in the throes with it, it was hard because I have found over the years that I am a very I did not know this when I first started, obviously, but I'm a very project-based writer. I'm very like it's like each book is kind of like this little yearbook of like what was I up to on from this particular stretch to this particular stretch. And because Dead Don't Need Reminding had so much longer of a kind of gestation period than any of the other works that I have ever had the chance to work on, I think that it sometimes became a little bit difficult to determine like what were the outer boundaries of the book. Like there was almost like a really rushed and that's why I didn't make the book, but like I was trying in the dying days to shoehorn in this essay about mob the Sopranos and race riots, and it was gonna be like a whole thing. And I was really excited about it, and it made absolutely no sense timeline-wise. It was not going to be helpful. It was going to be one of those things where people were going to look at it and be like, 18 of these essays are really good.
Maybe that's part of another book and part of your riff on your experience of therapy, Tony Soprano with his therapist.
And so that's the thing. But absolutely. So I think that's been the interesting thing of trying to figure out like I definitely, as I was working on this, I was like, I feel like this is the last nonfiction project for a while. I continue to feel like it's good. Like whenever there will be another one, it's gonna be a minute. Just because I put everything that I had into it. I put like all 30 previously lived and survived years of my life into it, and so I think that it's good to let something else happen and let other things like build and gestate and like have distance from it. But I do definitely think about trying to find another home for that Sopranos essay because I did have a thing that I wanted to say with it, but
I'm
it
going to
just
love
did
to
not
read that
fit.
essay.
It just
I,
did not fit. It was like
yeah,
it had to make a connection with the movie, and then we were going to talk about
yeah,
how
but it's in
David
your
Chase can't
parking
write
lot.
black people. He just can't.
You,
He can do so many other things. I love The Sopranos, but like, he just cannot write black people to save his life. And but yeah, so to answer the other part of your question, primarily like what I've found a lot of like really sustainable love and joy in is like, the work that I do for kid literature right now. I'm promoting like The Chainbreakers, which is a book about a tween Grim Reaper who helps the souls of folks lost during the Middle Passage. And it's an action adventure novel, and it's really, really cool. I'm very proud of it, and it was inspired in a large part by, I had the tremendous blessing that when I was growing up, when I was a kid, the first time I can ever remember seeing slavery or hearing about slavery, seeing it represented in a book was the People Could Fly by Virginia Hamilton. And
yes,
so
of
like it's very
course.
notable to
Yes.
me that like, and I think that it honestly speaks a lot to my politic that is even showing up in spot my politic, my lyric, the way that I talk about image. Like I think that it shows up in everything that like the very first time that I learned that my people had been mauled and oppressed. It was also a story that ended with them speaking words, and some of them were able to fly away. And so to me, The Chainbreaker is very much my love letter to that story. But what I'm working on right now is uh I'm sure it'll be announced by the time that this is I'm sure it'll be announced by the time that this is out. And also I'm like 30 days, literally 30 days away from when it needs to be turned in. And I am farther behind than I want to be. But I'm working on a verse novel for middle schoolers. It's about a 12-year-old basketball player named Malik Page. It's called
These books for the younger readers are absolutely wonderful. I'm so thrilled that that's part of your journey. We're at our time, but
Yes.
you are fascinating to talk to. I hope we'll have another chance to talk to you. Maybe we'll get to talk about your books for young readers another time. I just am so impressed with what you've produced. You're still so young, and you write with such maturity and sensitivity. The way you're able to touch what's beautiful, what's painful, what is anguish, but it just is extraordinary. I want everybody to please make sure you read this book. It's going to change your life. I can't wait to keep going. Thank you so much, Julian. You're just a wonder and a delight. Thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you for having me.